lecture hall of the Galactic Academy hummed with quiet anticipation. Rows of alien students, each representing a different species from across the known universe, sat in their designated sections. Some had crystalline bodies that shimmered under the artificial lighting, while others had thick, armored exoskeletons or sleek, elongated limbs suited for different planetary environments. At the center of the vast chamber stood Professor Xylar, an esteemed scholar from the Zerithian race, his 6 eyes scanning the gathered students with an air of quiet authority. His elongated, segmented arms gestured toward the massive holographic display behind him, which flickered to life with an intricate projection of the Milky Way. "Galactic warfare has shaped civilizations for millennia," he announced in a measured, resonant tone. "The ability to defend one's people, to outthink and outmaneuver adversaries, is the key to survival in this universe. Your task for the next 30 planetary cycles is simple. Design the ultimate weapon." A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. The challenge was a prestigious one, reserved for the most advanced students of the Academy. The winner of this competition would earn the coveted title of Supreme Galactic Innovator, a distinction that had launched the careers of some of the greatest scientific minds in history. Professor Xylar extended one of his arms, the clawed fingers curling slightly as he continued. "Your weapon must be more than destructive. It must be efficient, adaptable, and innovative. It must give its wielder an advantage that no other combatant possesses. It must be revolutionary. At the end of the allotted time, you will present your designs before the Academy, and only one of you will earn the title." The students sat in rapt attention. Some species communicated through pheromones or subtle shifts in bioluminescence, their excitement visible only to those attuned to such signals. Others whispered among themselves, already brainstorming concepts, sketching rough blueprints in the air with digital interfaces embedded in their wrists. Among them sat the only human in the room, Melvin Hill. He had been the subject of curiosity since the moment he arrived at the Academy. Humans, though relatively new to the wider galactic community, had gained a reputation for their adaptability and resilience. Despite their lack of biological enhancements or natural weaponry, they had managed to survive on a death world, a term many species use to describe Earth due to its unpredictable weather patterns, dangerous wildlife, and seemingly endless threats. Melvin leaned back in his seat, arms crossed as he listened. Unlike his alien counterparts, who were already discussing plans for high-powered energy weapons, molecular disintegration cannons, and biochemical warfare agents, he remained silent. He had grown accustomed to being underestimated. Professor Xylar turned his gaze toward him. Though the instructor had never outright dismissed the human student, it was clear he viewed Melvin's presence with some skepticism. The Zerithian race valued intellect and precision, and humans, while resourceful, were still seen as an enigma. The professor's 6 eyes blinked in sequence before he addressed the class once more. "You will have access to the Academy's research laboratories, materials, and testing facilities. However, you will work independently. Collaboration is forbidden. Your designs must be your own, and any attempt at interference with another student's work will result in immediate disqualification." A chime echoed through the hall, signaling the end of the briefing. Students stood from their seats, some stretching their multiple limbs or adjusting their biosuits to better accommodate the change in posture. The excitement was palpable. As Melvin made his way toward the exit, he overheard snippets of conversation from his fellow students. A Xantharian with metallic skin scoffed as he passed by. "Humans barely understand interstellar physics. I doubt he'll make it past the first stage." Another student, a towering reptilian being with emerald scales, chuckled. "Perhaps he'll surprise us. Or perhaps he'll build a primitive projectile launcher, like those his species used centuries ago." Melvin smirked but said nothing. Let them talk. He had no intention of building a weapon in the traditional sense. Instead, he had an idea, one that he doubted any of them would consider. As he walked down the gleaming corridors of the academy, passing under the soft glow of artificial skylights that mimicked the distant stars beyond, he considered the nature of warfare. Every species seemed to believe that power lay in destruction, in raw firepower capable of overwhelming an enemy. But history, both human and galactic, had shown him otherwise. The most powerful tools were not those that destroyed, but those that created. By the time he reached his designated laboratory, a plan had already begun to form in his mind. Melvin stepped into his assigned research lab, the automatic doors sliding shut behind him with a quiet hiss. The room was starkly lit, its walls lined with workstations equipped with the latest galactic engineering tools. Transparent holoscreens flickered to life as he approached the central console, displaying a vast selection of materials, schematics, and experimental technologies available for use. He had everything he could possibly need, yet the approach he intended to take was unlike anything the others would consider. He pulled up a list of recent galactic military advancements, scrolling through the latest plasma-based weaponry, graviton disruptors, and molecular destabilizers. The alien students at the Academy would undoubtedly be focused on these technologies, each attempting to outmatch the other in sheer firepower. Melvin, however, saw a fundamental flaw in that mindset. Every powerful weapon invited an equally powerful countermeasure. Energy shields nullified plasma beams, adaptive armor withstood kinetic impacts, and electronic warfare rendered automated systems useless. No matter how advanced a weapon became, there was always something that could neutralize it. Instead of designing something that could be countered, he needed to create something that couldn't be categorized as a weapon in the first place, something so versatile that it couldn't be reduced to a single function. His idea wasn't about destruction, it was about adaptability. He accessed the Academy's material database, selecting a lightweight yet incredibly durable alloy commonly used in interstellar hulls. The metal had self-repairing properties when exposed to an energy source, which meant it could potentially recover from structural damage on its own. He added it to his fabrication list. Next, he searched for programmable nanostructures capable of reconfiguring themselves on a molecular level. These were typically used in high-end industrial tools, but they had never been considered for combat applications. Melvin saw an opportunity. He set the fabricator into motion, watching as the machine processed the raw materials, layering them atom by atom into the base form of his design. While the device took shape, he turned his attention to the control interface. If his tool was going to be effective, it needed to respond instantly to its user's needs. Conventional weapons required manual input, triggers, buttons, or neural links. That wasn't fast enough. Instead, he integrated an adaptive AI, one that could analyze a situation in real time and modify the tool's function accordingly. The AI wouldn't just follow commands, it would anticipate them, adjusting its structure before the user even finished thinking about it. By the time the first prototype emerged from the fabricator, Melvin had refined the concept down to a single, compact module, smooth, metallic, no larger than the palm of his hand. At first glance, it was unimpressive. Compared to the towering weapons likely being built in the other labs, it looked almost insignificant. But when he activated it, the metal rippled, shifting into a blade before seamlessly reforming into a reinforced energy shield. A moment later, it reshaped into a high-powered cutting tool, then into a compact drone interface. He grinned. It was working. The true test, however, would come in real-world simulations. He needed to see how it performed under pressure. Melvin accessed the Academy's training facility, reserving a private simulation chamber. He stepped inside, the doors sealing behind him as the room darkened. A synthetic voice prompted him to select a scenario. He chose a standard combat survival test, one that was designed to evaluate a weapon's efficiency against an array of threats. As the simulation began, the environment shifted around him, forming into a dense urban battlefield. Enemy drones patrolled the skies, while automated defense turrets scanned for targets. Melvin activated his device. The moment his mind focused on movement, the tool extended into a grappling line, latching onto a nearby structure and pulling him upward. He landed on a rooftop just as a drone detected him, its targeting sensors flashing red. Before he could consciously react, his tool shifted again, forming a pulse disruptor that sent an electromagnetic blast toward the drone, shutting it down instantly. A second later, incoming fire from a turret forced him to move. His device reconfigured into a reflective shield, deflecting the shots before seamlessly transitioning into a precision energy blade. For the next several minutes, Melvin moved fluidly through the battlefield, his tool adapting to every situation without hesitation. Where others would be limited by the rigid design of their weapons, he had no such constraints. Every challenge was met with a perfect response, every threat neutralized with the most efficient countermeasure. By the time the simulation ended, Melvin stood in the middle of the now empty battlefield, his device shifting back into its compact form. He exhaled, his heart pounding from the intensity of the test. He had done it, but this was only the beginning. Now he had to refine it even further, because when the final presentations came, he wouldn't just need to prove that his invention worked. He would need to prove that it was better than anything the Academy had ever seen. Melvin stood in the dimly lit lab, his gaze fixed on the sleek, compact device resting in the center of the workstation. It had performed well in the simulation, adapting seamlessly to every threat, but he knew that a controlled environment was no substitute for the unpredictability of real-world combat. If he was going to prove his invention superior to the traditional weapons the other students were designing, he needed more than just functionality. He needed perfection. He tapped the control panel, bringing up the diagnostics. The energy efficiency was optimal, the structural integrity held under extreme conditions, and the adaptive AI had successfully anticipated his needs during the test. Yet something was missing. While the device was versatile, it lacked a deeper level of intuition. It reacted fast, but it didn't think ahead in the way he needed it to. In a battle, a fraction of a second could mean the difference between victory and failure. He rubbed his chin, considering the possibilities. The AI's current model relied on predictive analytics, but it needed something more, something instinctual. He pulled up a neural interface schematic, an experimental technology designed for high-speed computational adjustments. Theoretically, it could allow the device to form an almost symbiotic connection with its user, syncing not just with commands but with subconscious intent. Melvin hesitated for only a moment before initiating the modifications. He linked the neural interface into the core AI, rewriting sections of the code to allow for deeper integration. Once the process was complete, he secured the device onto his wrist and activated the link. A sharp tingle ran through his arm as the connection established, the neural pathways syncing with his biosignature. At first, there was silence. Then, suddenly, a flood of sensory data rushed into his mind. He felt the presence of the device not as a tool, but as an extension of himself. He clenched his fist, and before he could consciously think of a command, the device shifted into a reinforced gauntlet. He exhaled sharply. This was it. The AI wasn't just responding to what he told it to do, it was interpreting what he needed before he even gave the order. A slow grin spread across his face. Now he was ready. The announcement came over the Academy's intercom system. The final presentations were to take place in the main hall, where each student would demonstrate their creation before the judges and the rest of the class. Melvin grabbed his prototype and made his way out of the lab, his heart pounding with anticipation. The grand hall was already filled when he arrived. Towering banners of the Galactic Academy hung from the high ceilings, their emblems glowing faintly. The seating was arranged in a circular formation around a central stage, where each student would showcase their work. Melvin took his place among the competitors, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd. The tension was palpable. Professor Xylar stood at the center of the stage, his 6 eyes scanning the gathered students before he spoke. Each of you has been given the opportunity to push the boundaries of galactic warfare. Today you will demonstrate the results of your efforts. Your weapons will be evaluated on power, efficiency, and innovation. The student who presents the most groundbreaking creation will be awarded the title of Supreme Galactic Innovator. The first competitor stepped forward, a Xantharian whose crystalline body shimmered under the stage lights. He unveiled a massive, cannon-like weapon, its energy core pulsating with contained plasma. When he fired, the blast obliterated a reinforced target across the hall, leaving behind a molten crater. The crowd murmured in approval. Next came a reptilian student who showcased a swarm-based attack system. Dozens of micro-drones emerged from his device, moving in perfect synchronization to simulate an overwhelming assault. The display was impressive, each drone reacting to threats in real time, adjusting formations as needed. One by one, the students presented their weapons. Each more destructive, more advanced than the last. Some relied on brute force, others on precision, but they all shared the same core philosophy: power through devastation. Finally, it was Melvin's turn. He stepped onto the stage, feeling the weight of every eye in the room upon him. He could hear the whispers from the audience, the skepticism already forming. He ignored it. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out the compact device and held it up. A wave of laughter rippled through the crowd. "Is that it?" someone scoffed. Professor Xylar raised a hand for silence. "Proceed with your demonstration." Melvin activated the device, feeling the familiar surge of energy as it synced with his neural pathways. Without a word, he flicked his wrist and the tool shifted into a curved energy blade. In an instant, he slashed through a reinforced test structure. The cut so precise that the two halves barely moved before sliding apart. Before the audience could react, the blade retracted, morphing into a high-powered pulse shield just as an automated turret targeted him. The blast struck the shield, dispersing harmlessly. With a quick step forward, Melvin reconfigured the tool into a gravity disruptor, pulling the turret from its mount and sending it crashing to the ground. The murmurs of amusement had ceased. Now there was only silence. He wasn't finished. A new set of drones activated, moving to attack from multiple angles. The device shifted instantly into an energy wave emitter, sending out a controlled pulse that disabled their targeting systems. As they spiraled out of control, he caught one mid-air, the device seamlessly integrating with the drone's interface, overriding its programming in an instant. Instead of attacking, the drone realigned itself to hover at his side, now under his control. He turned back toward the crowd. "This isn't a weapon," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's something better." The murmurs returned, but they were different now, curious, not dismissive. Professor Xylar stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Melvin held up the device, letting it shift between forms. "Every weapon here is built for a single purpose: destruction. But the moment you create a weapon, you also create a counter to it. A stronger shield, a faster defense, a better deterrent. It's a cycle that never ends. My creation doesn't fit into that cycle. It adapts, it learns, it gives its user exactly what they need in any situation, not just combat, but survival, exploration, engineering. It isn't just a weapon, it's the last tool anyone will ever need." The silence stretched for several long moments. Then, slowly, Professor Xylar nodded. "We will deliberate." Melvin stepped back, exhaling as he returned to his place among the competitors. He could feel the shift in the room. The laughter was gone. In its place was something far more satisfying: respect. Melvin stood among the competitors, his heartbeat steady but his mind racing. The silence that followed his demonstration had lingered longer than he expected. He could still feel the weight of countless eyes on him, watching, assessing, perhaps even reconsidering their earlier dismissals. He had seen the moment doubt crept into their minds, the shift from amusement to intrigue. That was what he had been waiting for. But intrigue alone wouldn't be enough. Professor Xylar remained at the center of the stage, his 6 eyes locked onto Melvin as if dissecting every movement, every breath. The other students had retreated to the sidelines, their expressions ranging from frustration to reluctant curiosity. The weapons they had designed were powerful, each an achievement in its own right, but none of them had challenged the fundamental nature of warfare itself. Melvin's device did, and that made him a threat not just to his competitors, but to the very philosophy that had guided galactic military strategy for centuries. The deliberation had begun. The panel of judges, composed of high-ranking officials from various interstellar factions, convened in whispered discussion. Their expressions were unreadable, their body language giving away nothing. Melvin knew they weren't just evaluating effectiveness, they were deciding whether his creation had a place in the galaxy at all. The tension thickened as the murmurs among the students grew. Some were quietly debating his device's potential. Others were less subtle in their skepticism. "He's a fool if he thinks that thing will replace real firepower," one of the reptilian students muttered, his claws tapping impatiently against the armrest of his seat. Another student, a towering being with metallic plating along his arms, scoffed. "It's a tool. Tools don't win wars." Melvin didn't turn to respond. He had no interest in convincing them. His invention would speak for itself. Finally, Professor Xylar raised a hand, silencing the room. "The judges have reached their decision." The hall fell into absolute stillness. Melvin kept his expression neutral, though every muscle in his body tensed in anticipation. The professor's gaze lingered on Melvin before he spoke again. "The weapon that shall be declared the most advanced and innovative in this competition will be tested in a live combat simulation." A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. That wasn't how these evaluations were supposed to go. Normally, the panel would announce a winner based on technical assessments and controlled demonstrations. A live combat test meant they weren't convinced. Or worse, they were afraid of what his device represented. Professor Xylar continued. "A controlled battlefield scenario has been prepared. The competitors will have one final opportunity to prove the worth of their designs. Their weapons will be pitted against a fleet of autonomous combat drones, programmed with adaptive countermeasures." Melvin exhaled slowly. He had anticipated resistance, but this was beyond what he expected. This wasn't a test, it was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown at his feet. He glanced at the other students. Some looked satisfied, others apprehensive. A live test meant that power, efficiency, and adaptability would be judged in real time, with no room for debate. A new announcement echoed through the chamber. "All participants, report to the combat arena immediately." The audience shifted, moving toward the observation platform surrounding the Academy's largest training ground. Melvin walked in silence, his device resting in his palm, its surface smooth and unassuming. The others carried their weapons with pride, some larger than Melvin himself, each radiating raw destructive capability. He wasn't intimidated. He had seen brute force fail before. The combat arena was a vast, enclosed field designed to mimic real-world battle conditions. Artificial structures rose like a cityscape, complete with narrow corridors, open spaces, and strategic vantage points. Overhead, the observation decks glowed with the presence of dozens of high-ranking officials, instructors, and students eager to see the final test unfold. Professor Xylar's voice carried through the arena. "The simulation will begin in 60 seconds. Each participant will engage independently. Your goal is to survive. The drones will escalate their tactics as they adapt to your capabilities. The last competitor standing will prove the superiority of their design." Melvin inhaled deeply, rolling his shoulders as the countdown began. He could feel the pulse of the device through his neural link, an almost imperceptible hum against his skin. It was ready. The timer hit 0. Instantly, the arena erupted into chaos. Combat drones, sleek and lethal, descended from above, their metallic frames glinting under the artificial light. They moved with terrifying precision, each programmed to counter conventional attack strategies. Energy blasts tore through the air, explosions rattled the structures as competitors unleashed their weapons. Melvin moved. A drone locked onto him, its targeting systems flashing red. His device shifted in an instant, forming a gravitic pulse emitter. With a flick of his wrist, a wave of force sent the drone spiraling into a nearby wall, its frame crumpling on impact. Another drone fired from the rooftop above. The device morphed into a compact shield, deflecting the blast as Melvin dove into cover. Across the battlefield, his competitors were faring differently. The Xantharian's plasma cannon unleashed devastating beams, slicing through multiple drones. But the AI adapted quickly. Reinforced shielding neutralized his attacks, forcing him to retreat. The Reptilian's swarm drones engaged in aerial maneuvers, but the enemy fleet outnumbered and outmaneuvered them. One by one, his defenses collapsed. Melvin didn't need overwhelming firepower, he needed efficiency. He stayed on the move, his device shifting seamlessly from one function to another. A targeting interface appeared across his vision, mapping enemy trajectories. He anticipated an incoming strike, twisting his device into a grapple that pulled him to higher ground just as a missile detonated below. The battle stretched on, the remaining competitors falling one by one. The drones were relentless, learning from every engagement, countering with ruthless precision. Melvin had expected it. The difference was, his device learned too. His neural link pulsed again, responding to his subconscious needs. A drone cut off his escape. His device shifted into a high-frequency disruptor, scrambling its sensors long enough for him to disable it with a precise energy burst. Another closed in from behind. His tool morphed into a shockwave emitter, knocking it from the sky. Minutes passed like hours. The battlefield was a wasteland of fallen drones and disabled weapons. And then the silence returned. Melvin stood alone, his breath coming in steady, measured inhales. The last drone lay at his feet, its systems fried. His device retracted, once again no more than a simple metal shape resting in his palm. A voice broke through the comms. Simulation complete. The observation decks were silent. Then, one by one, the officials rose to their feet, not in anger, in recognition. Melvin stood in the center of the battlefield, his breath steady, his grip relaxed. The metallic device in his palm had returned to its dormant state, a simple, unassuming shape once more. Around him, the wreckage of disabled drones littered the simulated cityscape. Their systems fried, their once lethal precision now nothing more than inert machinery. The arena was silent, save for the faint hum of the energy barriers deactivating. Above, in the observation decks, the gathered officials, professors, and students had risen to their feet. Their expressions were unreadable at first, locked in stunned disbelief, but as the moment stretched on, the silence took on a different weight, one of recognition, of reluctant admiration. Professor Xylar descended from the platform, his long, segmented arms folded behind his back as he approached. His 6 eyes flickered between the fallen drones and the lone human who had outlasted them all. There was no visible emotion on his face, but his voice carried something that had not been present before. Respect. The simulation has ended, he announced, his gaze fixed on Melvin. And we have our answer. The other competitors had begun to gather, their weapons either damaged or rendered useless in the fight. Some looked at Melvin with outright frustration, others with curiosity, but none of them spoke. They had seen it with their own eyes. Professor Xylar turned to face the judges. Melvin Hill's creation has not only proven its effectiveness in combat, but has also demonstrated something far more significant. A fundamental shift in the philosophy of warfare. This was not a weapon of brute force. It was not designed to overpower with sheer destruction, and yet it adapted, survived, and prevailed. One of the high-ranking officials, a representative from a military faction known for its rigid adherence to traditional weaponry, stepped forward. His expression was tight, his posture rigid. "This device," he said slowly, "defies standard classifications. It is neither offensive nor purely defensive. It is something else entirely." Melvin met his gaze without flinching. "That's the point," the official exhaled sharply, glancing toward the wreckage before shifting his attention back to Melvin. Your invention challenges every established military doctrine in the known galaxy. If mass-produced, it would render half the current arsenal obsolete. Melvin's grip on the device tightened. Or it could eliminate the need for escalation altogether. A murmur swept through the crowd. It was an audacious statement, one that no military leader would easily accept. Wars were fought through superior firepower, through overwhelming strength, through the ability to destroy faster and more efficiently than the enemy. But his invention wasn't about destruction. It was about adaptability, about survival, about ending fights before they ever truly began. Professor Xylar studied him carefully before speaking again. The purpose of this competition was to determine the most advanced and innovative weapon among our students. Melvin Hill, your design has redefined the very nature of this challenge. He turned to the judges. The title of Supreme Galactic Innovator is yours, should the panel agree. There was no immediate response. The officials exchanged glances, weighing the implications of what had just unfolded. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the lead judge, a figure of considerable influence within the Interstellar Council, stepped forward. His expression remained impassive, but his next words carried a weight that none could ignore. "Is agreed." The room erupted. Some in the crowd cheered, others debated heatedly, but the decision was final. Melvin had won. Professor Xylar inclined his head slightly, a rare gesture of acknowledgement. "Congratulations." Melvin exhaled, tension he hadn't realized he was holding finally easing from his shoulders. He had done it. Not just proven himself, but reshaped the very conversation about what a weapon could be. The other competitors approached, some begrudgingly, others with genuine curiosity. The Xantharian with the plasma cannon crossed his arms, his gaze still sharp. "I don't like it," he admitted. "But I can't deny it works." The reptilian student, who had boasted about his drone swarms, shook his head in disbelief. "You didn't just build a weapon. You built a solution." Melvin allowed himself a small grin. That was the idea. As the ceremony concluded, he was approached by representatives from multiple factions. Scientists eager to study his design, military strategists determined to understand its implications, corporate investors already considering the commercial applications. He listened, answered when necessary, but gave no promises. This wasn't about mass production. It wasn't about profit. It was about proving a point. And he had. Later, as the academy halls emptied and the weight of his victory settled, Melvin found himself standing alone in the quiet corridors, staring down at the device in his hand. A small, simple shape, yet it had changed everything. He turned it over once more, watching as it shifted between forms at his command. A weapon, a tool, a new way forward? Perhaps all of them, or perhaps something greater than any of those things. Either way, the galaxy would never see warfare the same way again. And that was enough.